So how bad a day at the office was it for Donald Trump on Tuesday? Virtually within minutes, one court convicting his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, on 8 counts of fraud, while his personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, pleaded guilty over hush money paid to alleged former mistresses of the then Republican candidate for president. The second case directly implicates Trump, and if both turn state's evidence to avoid lengthy jail sentences, the trouble may just be starting. But the road to publicly proving Trump colluded with Russia to win the 2016 election may be long indeed. In the meantime, the occupant of the White House remains on message, ignoring the convictions at a rally of supporters in coal mining country in West Virginia late Tuesday. What is his plan for weathering the storm? What direction will his presidency now take? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Donald Trump's mounting troubles. We'll be joined from New York City by Sam Nunberg, former campaign advisor to Donald Trump, who's now senior advisor to former Trump White House counsel Steve Bannon. Joining us now from Newport, Rhode Island, Tom Nichols, who teaches at the U.S. Naval War College and the author of The Death of Expertise. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we welcome back from Washington, Kurt Mills, reporter at the National Interest. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Yeah, after that terrible Tuesday for Trump, it's on Twitter that the U.S. president's been reacting, directing his ire at his longtime personal attorney. Catherine Viette has more.
Reeling from revelations by his former personal attorney, Donald Trump has gone on the offensive, venting his anger on Twitter.
If anyone is looking for a good lawyer, I would strongly suggest that you don't retain the services of Michael Cohen.
Trump is also accusing Cohen of making up stories in order to get a deal from prosecutors. On Tuesday in federal court, Cohen pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations, which include hush money payments to 2 women who say they had affairs with Trump. The testimony has sent shockwaves through Washington and increases pressure on the president's inner circle over possible links with Russia during the campaign election.
Anytime your lawyer is convicted of anything, is probably not a good day. The central question for me has always been, did this campaign reach out to the Russians and coordinate in a fashion to give them an advantage?
Despite the president's current woes, many Republicans are still standing by him.
I haven't been able to look at all the detail, but I would note that none of this has anything to do with the Russians' collusion or meddling in the election, which seems to be the main focus and certainly has been the subject of an investigation by the Senate Intelligence Committee that I sit on.
Cohen's attorney says the president's one-time fixer has more to tell, information that would be of interest to Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller, the man tasked with investigating Russian interference in the 2016 election.
Let me begin with you in New York, Sam Nunberg. At this point in time, that is the when you hear that the lawyer for Michael Cohen says he's got things to tell the special prosecutor, it's not a good day, is it?
Well, it's funny. You pointed to the lawyer for Michael Cohen. That is one of the reasons why Trump supporters, Trump voters, and a lot of independents who don't support this investigation do not support this idea that Michael Cohen, who used to profess his utmost loyalty to say I would take a bullet for Donald Trump, he's being represented by Clintonista, somebody who Michael has exhumed from the Clinton crypt, and Lanny Davis. Lanny wrote a book. The book said that the election was stolen from Hillary Clinton. And now suddenly Lanny seems to me that he's using Michael to his own ends. What Lanny has said is that Michael can offer the special counsel certain issues, but it's very important. Look, I was in that grand jury. I was questioned by the special counsel in a voluntary. I gave extensive testimony on Michael. The special counsel's office didn't want anything to do with Michael. So the idea that Michael and his plea deal is going to lead to the impeachment and removal of office from Donald Trump is just not realistic, and I tell you that from firsthand knowledge.
Nonetheless, and here we'll take a look at what one of Trump's most outspoken critics has said. He was Richard Nixon's White House legal counsel during the Watergate investigation. Like Cohen, John Dean pleaded guilty at the time, would eventually prove key in forcing Nixon to become the first U.S. president to resign from office in 1974. Time magazine asked John Dean about Cohen, and here's what he had to say. He said he's pretty much identified the president as a criminal. He said he did it at his behest. If Trump weren't president, he probably would be named as a co-conspirator and indicted. What does that mean for the comparisons for Watergate, the journalist asks? It's a conspiracy. Watergate was a conspiracy. This is a campaign conspiracy. Sam Nunberg, your thoughts on that?
Michael said yesterday in testimony that he made a $130,000 payment at the behest of Donald Trump. I was asked about this in the grand jury. What I said was that Michael's bailiwick, Michael's responsibilities were, yes, making payments like this. However, if Michael were to have coordinated this with Donald Trump, Donald would have given him the money. The president would have given him the money. Therefore, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that what Michael is saying specifically.
He says he was following orders.
Well, if he was following orders, then Trump would have given him the money directly. If Trump claims that he did it. Rudy Giuliani has even said, well, look, we paid him back in 2017, meaning that they had no knowledge of it. So even if they did, now this is a very important point. Even if they did, first of all, Michael pled guilty to something that nobody's ever pled guilty to before. I'm not sure a jury would have found that guilty of an FEC violation. I looked at the statute. But even if they did, we're talking about a fine. We're not talking about jail time, and Michael pled guilty, more importantly, to tax fraud. Unfortunately for him, I like Michael; he's a friend. Unfortunately for him, those were the four of the five counts that he pled to. The vast majority dealt with his own private businesses. So to make this out like he's John Dean, it's not analogous. There are a lot of people, of course, that want this president impeached, that think that this is going to be a Watergate. Mueller himself thought this would be like a layup, in my opinion. And it's just not working because the facts themselves are just not analogous when you look at the specifics of what's going on.
Tom Nichols, you agree?
I'm trying to make sense out of a lot of that. I think that was a lot of verbiage that just gets down to a very simple question. What did the president know and when did he know it? This question about whether Lanny Davis worked for the Clintons or what Cohen pleaded guilty to, there are two things that have happened in the past 12 hours. And we haven't even gotten to Paul Manafort, but there's two things that have happened in the past 24 hours. One is the president's personal lawyer said he committed 2 crimes at the direction of the then candidate. That's, we can keep slicing and dicing that one any way we want. His allocution in federal court was, I committed 2 federal crimes at the direction of a federal candidate who is obviously now the president. The other is that for the past, since last evening and again this morning, Cohen's lawyer, and it doesn't matter who his lawyer is because it's still his lawyer. It's like saying, it's like bringing Rudy Giuliani into it and saying he used to be a prosecutor in New York. Cohen's lawyer has said that Cohen has things to say to Robert Mueller that are of interest specifically with regard to the hacking of the DNC accounts and the meeting in Trump Tower. Now, those things are either true or they're not. Either Cohen has something to say about it or he doesn't. If he does, first, I think the fact that the president's own lawyer has implicated him in a crime prior to his presidency is a seismic event in American politics. And if it turns out that he has something to say about the Trump Tower meeting, the president's foreknowledge of it, and any kind of knowledge about the hacking, then that will be a gigantic event. Now, whether all this results in impeachment, that's a secondary question because impeachment is a political process, not a legal process. That's a matter for the Congress of the United States, not for the courts. But I think that the accumulated weight of all these legal charges will erode the president's credibility with everybody but that 30% of his base who will believe the president about anything at any time. But for the rest of the country, I think this is really a watershed moment. And I think we have gone past the tipping point of some sort.
Kurt Mills, it is a watershed moment. You agree?
I'm not so sure. I think that yesterday was plainly a debacle for the White House, but it's a question of whether or not this moves the needle and whether it should move the needle. Tom talks about 30% of the country that's standing by the president. As far as we know, the president's approval numbers are firmly in the 40s. And the question would be whether or not, he says, the president stands within the legal system, but in a lot of ways, the president, of course, stands outside the legal system. There's a lot of moves he could take if he wanted to. He could fire Mueller, he could fire Sessions, he could fire Rosenstein, and that adds all kinds of complications. And the real question is, Donald Trump was elected as the manifestation of a lot of desires and hopes of people that felt they were being cheated by the system or left behind by the system. And the question is whether or not, whether it be the legal system or impeachment, whether or not it's wise for the president to be removed from office sort of extra politically. That is, not by an election.
But in that interview that John Dean gave to Time magazine,
right,
he said Watergate played out over a long period of time, and this is just the beginning. Your thoughts on the fact that we have this president who's, been under investigation since day one, it seems.
Right. Well, John Dean obviously has a sort of incentive to milk the Watergate comparisons as best he can. If people insist on a corollary, I think a better corollary is the Bill Clinton administration, a sort of morally dubious president who has some stuff that might make people shudder. But the question is whether or not, with a very sound economy and a foreign theater that is not sending Americans home every day in body bags, whether or not people are willing to topple this presidency for what a lot of people see as low-level actions, and a lot of what the president's supporters see as an active conspiracy campaign by the so-called deep state. We may be a long way to seeing this, but I think the real question is fundamental: is whether or not it is in the country's interest, and this is going to have to be something that Mr. Mueller and as well as members of Congress are going to have to decide whether it's in the country's interest to remove the President of the United States who won an election, such a unique election, whether or not to remove him before he gets the chance to go to the voters again. And I think the decision on that is going to be, that's the watershed in American history.
All right, we're going to revisit that question, but first we promised Tom Nichols we would touch on the case of Paul Manafort. Now, he was convicted on 8 counts of fraud. They involved his dealings with Ukraine's former pro-Putin president Viktor Yanukovych, 5 tax fraud, 1 of hiding a foreign bank account, 2 of bank fraud charges. Before the end of the year, Paul Manafort will be back in court, and this time the accusations include acting as an unregistered foreign agent for Ukrainian interest. Tom Nichols, we saw in the report at the outset of the show, senators talking about the central question for them is, what has this got to do with the Russia probe? What are your thoughts when it comes to Paul Manafort?
Well, both Manafort and Cohen have a lot to do with the Russia probe. First of all, the president's campaign manager was sheltering money deeply in hock, living beyond his means, and taking all kinds of dirty money in all sorts of different directions, including from entities associated with the Russian government. In any other world, the same Republicans that are just trying to shrug this off as nothing, if this were Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or anybody else, they would have stormed the White House and would have impeached the occupant by now. This is, I think, to me, and I've said this before, of course, this is only my personal view. I think that the evidence is clear that the campaign itself was penetrated by the Russians. To me, there is just, my background is in Russia studies. The idea that the campaign was not penetrated by the Russians. Because there's simply no way to have this much interaction and this much financial interaction with the Russians and simply not be involved in interactions with Russian intelligence. And I think that the only question is, what did the candidate know Did he approve of it? Did he try and cover it up? But the idea that Paul Manafort wasn't juggled up with the Russians, again, it's to anybody who knows the Russians at all, that's just a laughable idea. With Cohen, the connection is, it seems that with all of the dirty dealings that go on around Donald Trump, everybody knows about it. They all coordinate about it to try to keep all of that stuff off of the president or off of the then candidate. The idea that the Trump Tower meeting, the story on that has changed so many times. It's impossible to keep track.
The Trump Tower meeting with that Russian lawyer.
Else. With a group of Russians who, by the way, Giuliani says, well, nobody really knew that they were Russians or, that they were working for the Russian government, despite, of the names involved, which, again, just doesn't pass the laugh out loud test. And so the real question is just going to be, what did Michael Cohen know about it? How deeply involved was Paul Manafort? How much of a firewall was there between these guys and the president himself? Because I think the campaign and the president's staff as a candidate were all completely compromised by this stuff. And it's just a matter of figuring out how deep or how close it got to the candidate, to the president himself.
I want to get the reaction of Sam Nunberg, but unfortunately we have to go to a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Yeah, we're revisiting how within a matter of minutes, a court in Alexandria, Virginia, convicting Donald Trump's former campaign manager while in New York in federal court, his longtime personal lawyer pleading guilty to charges relating to hush money paid on the campaign trail to two alleged mistresses. We're talking about it in the company of Sam Nunberg, former campaign advisor to Donald Trump, who's now senior advisor to former Trump White House counsel Steve Bannon. Welcome back from New York. Welcome back from Newport, Rhode Island, to Tom Nichols, who teaches at the U.S. Naval War College, and he's the author of The Death of Expertise. And joining us from Washington, D.C., Kurt Mills, reporter at the National Interest. Sam Nunberg, your thoughts on what we heard just before the break from Tom Nichols, that the fingerprints of Russia were often found in this campaign. That meeting at Trump Tower with that Russian lawyer close to the Kremlin and associates, it doesn't smell good. And just your thoughts on Paul Manafort, who will be back in court for charges that include acting as a foreign agent on the campaign trail. What was Paul Manafort like?
Well, so Paul joined the campaign because they had to, they were going to have trouble at the convention with delegates. And the president had some contact with him through Roger Stone together in the 80s. Let's get to the meeting. The meeting was they had a mutual friend in Ibn al-Gawlar, the Trump family. The Agalarovs had hosted Trump at his universe in Moscow. He made a lot of money from it. They bring this Russian attorney. They claim in the email, if you read the email says that Goldstone says that Agalarov met with a special crown prosecutor of Russia. There was a sealed indictment against Hillary Clinton, that this was going to be brought to them. This was information. I personally have no problem with that. What ended up happening was that this Russian attorney, Natalia, who, oh, by the way, was not allowed into the country earlier in the year. She wasn't granted immigration parole. The Obama Justice Department then allows her in. She comes up. She does a bait and switch. She lobbies against the Magnitsky Act. Very important here is, and this is the most important point, if this was some conspiracy with Russia, if Putin and Trump had some special deal, then I'd say, how did that work out? Where is the proof? This administration has been harder on Russia than the Obama administration and then the W administration. And that's just a fact. This administration has passed 4 separate sets of sanctions. That Magnitsky Act that the Russian attorney came to Trump Tower to lobby against, that is still in effect.
Yeah, but Putin
was complaining about the Magnitsky Act.
Here we're talking, Sam Nunberg, here we're talking about the campaign. Now, digging up dirt on an opponent, we have that too here in France. That's normal. But for us in France, what's hard to understand is why Donald Trump would speak to Russians about dirt on Hillary Clinton?
Well, that's a question. And you know what my response is? Why did Bill Clinton accept a $500,000 speaking fee in the first year when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State? Why did this Russian company that got the uranium war deal get $2.5 million to the Clinton Foundation? It would seem, because she was so corrupt, that there could have been something that happened in Russia. And a lot of people don't like to remember who Trump was facing. He was facing somebody who used her office to profit off of it, make millions upon millions of dollars. And it makes sense to us that there could have been people like me, that there could have been some kind of scandal in a foreign country. And also because she conveniently lost all her emails, a lot of them tied to her foreign travel and her scheduling.
All right, let me bring in Tom Nichols. Your thoughts?
This is ridiculous. First of all, if a foreign government, an enemy government, calls you as you're part of a political campaign and says, I have dirt on your opponent that is connected to a hostile foreign government, there is only one right answer. You call the FBI. That's it. There is no excuse. There's no what about. And there's no back in the 90s. There is no excuse about who your opponent is. You pick up the phone and you call the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This endless whataboutism about Hillary Clinton. This is what Trump apologists do. They fill the air.
Gentlemen, unfortunately we're on Skype here, so we can't hear either of you if you both shout over each other. First, Tom Nichols.
As I said, the only right answer is if a hostile foreign government calls you with dirt to influence an election in any way, you pick up the phone and you call the FBI. All the other answers to that are wrong. And all of this is the whataboutism of Hillary Clinton going all the way back to Bill Clinton. You know, that is irrelevant to the question of what is the right thing to do if people associated with the Russian government call you and offer you dirt on an American political campaign. And there is no other right answer than calling the FBI.
Kurt Mills, let me bring you in on this because your thoughts on all this. It's hard to comprehend how Russia, the nemesis of the United States for all those years after World War II, during the Cold War, could suddenly be such a big player surrounding this Trump campaign.
Right. I think Sam touches on something that's interesting, and that is that Americans need to get ready to have a conversation about what is sort of unspoken here in Washington, which is that foreign influence is pervasive, and whether or not we want to allow that as a country. The number of think tanks that take foreign donations, et cetera, would probably shock most readers and most viewers. And so, even Manafort himself, he was gotten under partially under the FARA rules, which are, not that enforced and were specifically used by Special Counsel Mueller. I think Tom is correct that to, completely exculpate themselves from any legal liability, if the Russians called or a clear ambassador or agent of the Russian Federation with dirt on their political opponents, they should have called the FBI. But I think we're having a much larger conversation than just the facts in the Trump case, which is what kind of interaction do we want to have with these foreign players? Now, the Russians are obviously an adversarial power, and dealing with them is more complicated and fraught than other countries. But there's a whole network of people internationally that want to influence the game here in D.C. Who the president is matters, and I think we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg in conversations like this.
Yeah, there's 190 countries, or 210, depending on how you count it, on this planet. But Russia's not any country, Kurt Mills.
Right.
We're seeing here in Europe the influence of Russian money on far-right parties in Western Europe. What do you make of this link between, that hasn't directly been proven, between Donald Trump himself, but certainly among some of his associates with Moscow?
Well, I think there's obviously some disconcerting ties between Trump associates and Russia, and clearly that Trump has this affinity towards strongmen or authoritarian leaders that you like. I don't think the collusion accusation has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt. And I think that you see within Trump's orbit, you do see a sort of a skepticism towards the liberal international order, and that's very much dovetails and parallels what Putin wants to see, which is the abolishment of the liberal international order.
The company he keeps, does it undermine the United States?
Does the company that, well, I mean, he's Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense is James Mattis, his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. I mean, his cabinet is, fairly conventional Republican. Most of his associates don't undermine the United States, no.
Tom Nichols?
Well, what a relief to be able to say most of the president's associates don't undermine the United States. Kurt's point about international lobbying, that's a great argument, and it's a great argument for another day. None of that is what this is about. And there are so many straw men aflame in this discussion today that it's impossible to see through the smoke. The question of, for example, Sam brought up how tough this administration is. Well, this Republican Congress, keeps voting to be tough, and the president drags his feet. I said just the other day in an article that there are two Russia policies. There's the president and his approach to Russia, and then there's the way the entire rest of the government, including Congress, seems to be reacting to Russia, and they're not on the same rails, in part because the president is just not very attentive about governing and on making those kinds of policies. But this isn't about foreign lobbying. Look, foreign lobbying, America is a country of immigrants. Foreign lobbying is going to happen because people, whether they're from Armenia or Greece or Ireland or England, wherever they're from, they're going to want interests of countries they care about represented. That's completely different from this hostile attack on our democratic institutions by a foreign power that wishes us nothing but ill. Kurt's absolutely right that Putin does not believe in the liberal international order, and apparently neither does at least some of the people around the president. But that shouldn't be the issue. That's a completely separate issue from the problem of foreign lobbying. And all of this is a separate issue from whether or not people in the Trump campaign were simply too close to Russia and accepting some kind of cooperation with Russia that was inappropriate. I think Kurt's right that the collusion between the candidate personally and Russia has not been proven. But I think that initial round of indictments from Robert Mueller, that circle is going to get smaller, because I think those Russian agents, there are going to be bridges from those guys somewhere into the Trump campaign. And I keep coming back to what I said at the very outset. It's going to come back to the classic Watergate question of what did the president know and when did he know it?
The president, who has been speaking in the past hour, asked about the payments made by Michael Cohen. He's told Fox News, later on I knew, but the money did not come from the campaign. It came from him, he says. Donald Trump, who again on Tuesday evening stayed on message, firing up his base, not just on Twitter, but at a rally in West Virginia, where his supporters chanted "Lock her up," their signature chants during the 2016 race against Hillary Clinton. Sam Nunberg, there is that those core Trump supporters who are going to support him no matter what. Where is it all heading right now? Are we headed towards the United States is already very polarized politically. How far will it go? Are you, for instance, in favor of firing the special prosecutor, trying to make it all go away?
Absolutely not. I don't think the president should or could fire the special prosecutor. We at Steve Bannon's organization, Citizens of the American Republic, we're working on this midterm election. Republicans hold the majority of 24 seats. Hillary Clinton won 23 seats, which a Republican held their seat, 23 districts. This 2018 becomes a referendum. It's almost as if it's Donald Trump's first re-elect. The other side is going to get a do-over. And what do I mean is that Nancy Pelosi is Speaker. You will have a Jerry Nadler as chair of the House Judiciary Committee, and he will use anything and everything, any loose conspiratorial claim to use as impeachment and send it to the Senate for a trial. The point of the matter is, yesterday when you started our segment, you said this was a terrible day for the president. Here's what I think. If we can get the Democrats to talk and rally and run on impeachment, that's a good day for me, because that's a day that I can help get enthusiasm and drive out Republican voters to support their Republican congressmen so that we can maintain the majority in the House. Right now, Robert Mueller's his investigation, he's underwater at under 50%. He's around 46, 47%. 90% of Republicans oppose his investigation, 90% of Democrats support it. So you're looking at independents nationally at 45% opposed, 55% support. If I guarantee you, I know this game very well. I guarantee you that Robert Mueller did not gain any independent support yesterday because he got his special counsel got a guilty 8 out of 18 charges, by the way, 8 out of 18. I thought these people were 12 feet tall and this was an easy paper trail case. 8 out of 18 charges against Manafort, and they got a lawyer connected to Trump to make claims that completely contradict public claims that he made before. And that's where I stand.
All right. Unfortunately, we've run out of time because this debate is only just beginning. I want to thank you so much, Sam Nunberg, for joining us from New York, Tom Nichols in Newport, Rhode Island, Kurt Mills in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.